Exciting episode here. NBA media. I think people are into it. What is up, everybody, and welcome into the DNVR Nuggets podcast, presented as always by DraftKings Sportsbook, America's top-rated sportsbook app. I'm flying solo as your host today, but I'm joined by who is one of, if not my single favorite writer on the interwebs covering the NBA. Certainly somebody that writes the most interesting topics, right? About the most interesting topics, including today, writing about mental health in a way that I just thought was absolutely fascinating. We're probably going to talk a little bit about that. We're going to talk a lot about Steph Curry, Nikola Jokic, RSNs, the media, all of this stuff I think people find interesting. We'll find out. He is, of course, Ethan Strauss. Ethan, thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me. I don't know if I cover the NBA, but I'll take all of the compliments. I cover something. Yeah. I'm doing something over there on Substack.
Doing something well. So yeah, a success story of independent media here, leaving, obviously left ESPN several years ago, left The Athletic, and then went out on your own. And it's a big success story here doing Substack. And in a lot of ways, what's interesting about you, you've always written, I think, good angles, but by your own admission, you're unshackled now, having to write for what maybe bosses want you to write about. You're diving into controversy. And it's funny, I say controversy. You're just writing into topics that are hard to write about when you write for an establishment.
Yeah, that's the thing. And what's funny about it, something I've learned, because I thought, oh my God, people are going to be so angry at me when I started this and they're going to lash out. I think it happens in the public forum of Twitter to a degree, but the true measure of anger is often what you get in private. And I haven't really gotten a whole lot of that. That's when it's revealed, when people are actually seeking you out and privately expressing contempt, as opposed to doing it for show on the basis of what they think the social norms are. And I also learned something else, which is back when I wrote for bigger institutions, there would, and a lot of people might not know this. They don't know the behind the scenes of how media happens if they're a fan of the NBA. But I would often see a writer who had a big article and it just crushed. Let's say it's at The Athletic, it racked up subs. You'd think that they would be happy, but in a lot of cases, no, they were exhausted, they were haggard. And why? It's because somebody was in their ear yelling at them on the phone because they're pissed off. Because if something is interesting, it's typically interesting because someone doesn't want you to know about it. So maybe it's the GM, maybe it's a player's agent. Maybe it's the NBA itself, because they're very aggressive about monitoring the reputation. And that is what I found. I would get pressure. I would get yelled at. My bosses would be pressured. And there were certain pressure points. There could be insinuations. If it's an agent, it might be that, hey, not only will this player not be available to you, but maybe your colleagues at the place you work for will not get any of my players talking to them. Nothing like that has happened to me. It has just been complete radio silence, despite the site doing well, despite the site getting subscriptions. I'm sure there are people who hate me, but what it taught me is that the expression of anger towards you often has more to do with that person's belief that they can pressure you and influence you and bully you than it is just about the anger itself, because nobody's trying me anymore, because there's just no real pressure point.
That's so fascinating. And I think it's true. I mean, we're a startup here at DNVR, and we have our haters. We have our people, that want to try to claim this or that about us. And I always say the same thing, like, hey, do we know who we are? Do we feel good about who we are?
Yeah.
You just got to keep moving, because honestly, those people are just trying to like throw the stones or try to drag you into the mud or this or that. And oftentimes, you just have to rise above it or keep going through it. And we're going to talk about some of that. So to let everybody know, I subscribe to exactly one Substack. It's House of Strauss. That is Ethan Strauss's Substack. It probably says more about me. I should probably not admit that. I have subscriptions to other newspapers and outlets of this, but Ethan writes about Woj and the way the NBA media is sort of all centered around him and the influence he has on how stories get told, when they get told. Writes about Clutch Sports, the relationships with Nike. I mean, a lot of these behind the scenes things that really, they go untold often, but they are so influential in what this league is and how fans experience it and how players experience it, to be perfectly honest. And I kind of want to dive into that. Kale, you could pull up the one thing I sent you. So Ethan, you have been around blogging. I mean, starting at blogging, like at the onset of blogging, but I know that one of your most famous moments here, I pulled this up. I'm sure you've been referenced this a lot. We go all the way back to 2014. You can scroll up, Kale, so everybody can see. Go back to 2014. Is this 14 or 15?
I think it's 2014 for the
Yep.
2014-2015 season.
Expert picks. We've all got the same people. Maybe it's the Lob City Clippers. Maybe it's KD's Thunder. Maybe it's the Cavs, the Spurs, and one person down here, Ethan Strauss. He predicted it would be the Golden State Warriors, covering the Warriors at the time for ESPN. You obviously famously were early on this one. So I want to go back. I want to rewind the clock and just kind of, first of all, take me back to 2014. What was Ethan Strauss's relationship to the NBA as a writer, as a fan, and maybe setting the table for how it has evolved in the decade since?
I'm trying to remember what would the flashback song be when we go back to 2014. It wouldn't be that Godier song. That was a couple years before it. Somebody in the chat, I believe, will come up with the ideal flashback song to 2014. So that year was a few months after I was hired to be full-time beat writer covering the Warriors. I was showing up doing freelance, and I've got to thank Royce Webb and Henry Abbott, who helped get me in the door. And I was told that I needed to quit writing for Bleacher Report because at that time Bleacher Report had a stigma attached to it, less so now.
Right.
And so they were kind of working me in with some freelance articles. And suddenly the Warriors were just so hot that they needed somebody covering them. And I was made full-time, I think in May of 2014, just simultaneous with Mark Jackson getting fired. It was basically, I was at the Bristol orientation, I can't even remember what it's called. Yeah, maybe it's orientation, rookie, whatever, as Mark Jackson's getting fired. So I immediately jump in. I write about the downfall of Mark Jackson. And so I was familiar with that team. And in preseason of the Kerr era Warriors, it was just shocking. It was shocking how different they looked, just strategically, right, the efficiency. And I know that you're not supposed to take stock of preseason, but I couldn't unsee what I was seeing. So that pick right there, I don't think that pick took any sort of genius. It was just, I was close to it. I would analogize it this way. There's so much fear when people are talking about a team they cover of seeming like a homer. You don't want to seem like a homer. Of
course. Yep.
Yeah, well, fair enough, but it's easier I always say it's easier to hear a car alarm if you're close to it. You're more likely to pick up on this new trend if you're actually observing the team and around it. You probably knew that Jokic was a great player before other people knew that he was a legitimately great player, right? So I thought to myself, I think this team has the best chance to win the championship. And then I thought, I know I'm not supposed to say that. And then I thought, I'm going to do it anyway. And that's basically my process on a lot of the content, even when whether it's some anodyne team prediction or some more fraught subject. I've got a certain, I don't even know what to call it, a lack of discretion, or some have called it a contrarianism, but it's almost like, the way I feel about it is almost like you've got this pimple or a boil. Sorry for being gross, but it's just this pressure building up. It's like, I got to release this. I got to release this take. This take it's building up. Warriors are going to win the championship. And thankfully they did.
All of my worst predictions have come from that exact phenomenon that you're talking about in reverse, where I'm like, I think I'm seeing this great thing. Like with Jokic, you mentioned it. Like, I'm like, this guy's incredible. Like, what can't he do? And then I'm like, I think he's like the best young prospect we've got. And then I sit there and think, I'm too close to it. I got to cushion this a little bit because I'm sure it's just I'm a little blinded. And then you turn out, you're like, no, he is way better than Porzingis. What was I talking about? Of course he was. It was obvious at the start. I just was too close. I got gun shy. I go back to 2014 for me personally, because I just started out in 2013 or 14. I had a full-time job. I was doing this as a passion project or what have you. I was so optimistic about the state of so many things about the NBA. I mean, the analytics revolution was sort of in full bloom, in that we were thinking about the game. For me, I'm a basketball lover first and foremost. I was thinking about it.
I'm sorry. I don't want to interrupt you, but it's very important. The flashback song would be "Fancy" by Iggy Azalea.
There you go. Oh man, that's not that great of a flashback. Okay.
No, it really is not.
But I was, the analytics revolution was in bloom. I'm thinking, how cool is this? I think I went to Summer League in 2015 and I wrote what has aged as one of the cringiest things I've ever written in my life. I talked about how awesome it was of all of these bloggers and Twitter coming together, and like, we're all happy in this. It's like this bar where we all get to sit down and be buds. And 8 years later, and it's like, oh my God, it's a hellscape. We're all yelling at each other, and the analytics conversation has reached its like lowest point, and all of these different things. But I say that because it's funny. This is the last decade, like the rise of the Warriors and the rise and change of so many ways that fans engage with the media. To me, you kind of had a front row seat because the Warriors have been, right there. And my first question is just, has it ruined the fan experience for you? You've obviously become this great writer and done all these things analyzing it, but has it ruined it? Are you more removed from it now from a heart standpoint?
Oh yeah. Oh, definitely. You see how the sausage gets made, it changes your relationship to it. But I always thought about I prefer that the Warriors win than that they lose. And there's a taboo against admitting that when you are in media on the local
Right.
level. You're supposed to be totally dispassionate. I'm just looking at this basketball game and I don't care at all about what happens. That's insane. I was able to pay rent and eventually a mortgage because Steph Curry became a superstar and the Warriors won basketball games. The idea that I wouldn't care about the outcome, I
Right.
think it's okay to admit that you want a certain outcome and then you try not to let that screw up your analysis. And
100%.
it's okay. It's okay. It's okay to go, I would prefer that this team wins. I would prefer that people in the Bay Area are excited about basketball, which is a sport that I really like. And then I'm going to try to be dispassionate and say that they're doing this thing well, they're doing this thing not so great. And yeah, eventually it does change your relationship to things. I think my wake up call was just when I was freelancing and Keith Smart stormed up to me after a press conference and started yelling at me for being critical of Monte Ellis. And I just was tripped out thinking, whoa, it's like my television is yelling at me. This is so weird. I guess I'm making it sound like I showed up to Oracle stoned in my 20s all the time, which maybe, but it got slowly beaten out of me, but I always loved that
Yeah.
energy in the crowd. There's nothing like it. There's nothing like going to that game 6 between the Warriors and the Cavs in the 2016 finals in Quicken Loans Arena, and they're playing In the Air of the Night by Phil Collins and the intro song like they do in
Yeah.
Cleveland. And you're watching the concessionaires belting out the lyrics in unison. Everybody's nervous. You can feel their nervous energy. There's just nothing like that. And that is the thing that I miss. And it's the thing that I'll always be geeked up for, regardless of however I feel about the state of the league.
And that's something to me that's extremely sacred, and it's going to come back in later in the conversation when we talk about that very feeling that you're talking about. 20,000 people, kind of all on the same wavelength, is something I think it's important for a city. Um, Here's where I really want to get into the conversation, though, and that is, we saw the Sports Business Journal had the local RSN ratings, and we just know this from national television ratings and everything else. The Warriors dominate. This is the era of the Warriors. It's still going on. I mean, there's all these other things that are going on, but the Warriors are still king when you talk about local ratings, but also just like, I go to the arena, I see who draws a crowd an hour before and who doesn't. And Steph Curry still draws a crowd an hour before tip off. How did they get this dominant? I know that sounds like a simple question. Steph Curry, they won championships, but lots of teams won championships. Lots of teams had dynamic player. They are so far above everybody else, in my opinion. How did they get to this point?
Joe Laco's genius. No, I mean, that's what you would want everybody to think. I think it was a confluence of factors, obviously, with a little dash of the unexpected. I think Steph Curry suddenly becoming a superstar after having been a beloved college basketball star, it came out of nowhere and it was fun. He was a personality people liked. And I think people resonate to these teams that they see grow up before their eyes. And in a league that is shaken up so much and so many guys have changed jerseys, the Warriors are still this identifiable brand that's been going for, God, I don't even know. Is it 8 years now? Something 8 or 9 years, right?
Right.
Where you've got Steph, Clay, Draymond, that you know who the Warriors are, you know who defines them. And that is so unusual. And for that to also exist, in addition to having them have been just take off like a rocket ship in popularity. But yeah, there's something ineffable about the Warriors and why they connected so much and why they got so big and why when I was around the team, Steph Curry's bodyguard said he felt like he was the bodyguard for 1985 Michael
Right.
Jackson.
Right.
And I might reflect on it at some point. I might write a book down the road, because I wrote a book about the fall of the Warriors and the collapse of the Kevin Durant dynasty, but I didn't talk too much about how it all came to be and the insane resonance, just because it felt like there hadn't been enough distance, there hadn't been enough space to really look back on it and think about it all. But I don't have a concise answer. I mean, it was awesome basketball. People like 3-point shooting. It felt organic. It seemed like the guys got along. And finally, maybe they're more than twice as popular locally than any team, because they are familiar, and familiarity wins out.
Some of those things you're mentioning, and by the way, the book is The Victory Machine, which I love. And I think I referenced every single day for about 3 months straight on this very show once it came out. There it is. Boom. Look at that synergy. Highly recommend it.
I almost accidentally like grabbed Michael Lewis's book. It's like held it up, confused people. Yeah.
And also launched in the most spectacular way. Everybody knows, I think, the famous sort of controversy with Kevin Durant calling you out or going after you in a presser. And then I think the next day you announced, oh, by the way, I'm writing a book, which I think is one of the funny moments in book launch history. A lot of the things you mentioned about the Warriors, I think, apply to Denver. They have the most continuity, I think, of any team over the last 7 years, and they have things working against them. I only bring up the Nuggets here to say that you're right that that's part of it. There's a big part of it that is, this is a team that we are familiar with, and you have these things. But there's some other things, some other secret sauce that is going into this. Some of this is Steph Curry's play style. Some of this is the fact that, as you mentioned, he had a very interesting NCAA tournament run that kind of launched him as a household name. So there's all these other things, and I think that's what I want to dissect here in segment 2 and kind of get into. Why did they do it? And why are the Nuggets the exact opposite of that? When to me, they have a great superstar. They're super fun. They've had the continuity. There's all these different storylines, and none of them connect. And that's kind of what I want to get into.
I'm such a nerd for these conversations. I know some people dismiss it. It's cool among NBA writers to say, I don't care what gets ratings. I just like the pure basketball. I don't know. It's fascinating to see what the habits of the American public are and what they're really into. And these conversations are fun to me because we don't totally know all the time. And there's this alchemy to when it completely works. And yeah, Jokic is fun to watch. If you love basketball, he's fun to watch. But is it that he doesn't want attention? Is it that he's from a small-ish Eastern European country that we just don't have much of a reference point or way into? And it might connect to, I love the statement he had. Was it last night? He was saying that scoring makes one person happy and assist makes two people happy. I loved that sentiment, but maybe that has something to do with why he hasn't resonated, because that kind of team focus, a little bit like Tim Duncan in another kind of way, is partially explains his success, but might explain why he hasn't really been out there. So I like looking at those questions and saying, hey, why is this a dog that doesn't bark? Why is this a dog that does bark? Because God damn it, the Nuggets are fun to watch, but they do not move the needle. You're not hearing them discussed all too often on First Take.
The Tim Duncan comparison, I hear a lot, and there's a lot to that, especially personality off the court wise, just to kind of like, hey, we're done with basketball. Don't interview me. I'm going home. I'm not on Twitter. There's that. But also stylistically a Larry Bird comparison, who is one of the most famous basketball players and beloved basketball players of all time. And we talk about fancy passing and sort of the edge you play with and this or that. There's a lot of that there. But again, connects in a completely different way. So why don't I hit my first break? I got to pay the ad money here, but on the other side, I'll get into that very question and compare and contrast Warriors, Nuggets, and some of the things going on there. But first, I got to remind everybody, the party bus this weekend that is going to Ball Arena, the DNVR Takeover, sold out, and it is sponsored by Avaca TV. In the upcoming segment, we're going to talk about Altitude Sports and Comcast, the dispute that has sort of crushed the soul of the city of Denver. Avaca TV has come up with a solution of that. They're a totally new paradigm for TV delivery that's less expensive, more efficient, and offers a superior picture than legacy providers. And service, of course, includes Altitude Sports, delivering Altitude Sports to Denver, Colorado Springs, Phoenix, Boise, and Twin Falls, Idaho. Here's what you do. You go to Avaca TV, or I'm sorry, Avaca EVOCA, avaca.tv/DNVR, and you get this deal, $25 per month, plus the cost of the receiver, which is $250 up front. $25, there's no contract, no hidden fees, and the price is locked in for 2 years. And that $25 a month gets you access to the Nuggets, Avalanche, Rapids, and Mammoth games, as well as a whole host of other channels, not just Altitude. It's a whole bunch of other things. And coming soon is AT&T Sportsnet Rocky Mountain, which of course unlocks all of the rest of the teams here in Denver. So you get everything for $25 a month. There's a issue going on between Comcast and Altitude. They've ruined it. Evoca TV, a new paradigm, is coming up with a solution. So check them out. The other sponsor of the party bus this weekend, Breckenridge Brewery, the official beer of DNVR. Everybody, all 100 people that are coming to Ball Arena for the DNVR takeover on Saturday, you're going to get free Breckenridge breweries on the party bus. That's right. From the 15-minute ride from the DNVR bar to the arena, you guys are going to get Breckenridge breweries, probably the Mile High City Copper Lager, the Denver-themed golden lager flavored beer that they have. We have it on top at the DNVR bar. We'll also have it in coolers on the DNVR party bus. You can also check out the farmhouse, which is down there in Centennial. Socially distanced, beautiful setup. It's actually getting warm out. You can watch the ducks in the pond while you eat wings. Check them out. They've got great beers. Avalanche, Amber, Strawberry Sky, Vanilla Porter Jr. Ooh. I hear it's coming back very soon. I hope it's coming back very soon. You can check all those out at the DNVR bar. Breckenridge Brewery, the official beer partner. All right, so hopping back into that, always fun when you get to go on the local shows and hear all their local ad partners.
So on the nose, Denver and its breweries. It's exactly what you would expect.
Of course, we've also got the dispensaries. You know, I mean, it really is a cliche of Denver companies that we have here at DNVR. We're a true Denver company. All right, so let's get into this. So Jokic, a couple things working against him. And again, I want to always think Steph Curry, Nikola Jokic, Golden State Warriors, Denver Nuggets, and just compare and contrast these things. Jokic is very fun, but he didn't have the college aspect of it. There's no, like, he arrived on the scene. Nobody knew who he was, including myself, including Denver Nuggets diehards. Didn't have a clue who this guy was. So he didn't have that momentum going into it. And I think that played a part of it. The part you mentioned that makes me cringe, but it's actually accurate. He comes from some place nobody knows of, which is crazy because Serbia, it's not like the most like crazy country. But even we know Shaq has tried to speak Russian to him, that I thought you were Russian, this or that. I think this honestly has the biggest part of it. Americans don't know anything about anything. So there's even the loosest connection to, oh, I know where that is.
Yeah. There's no frame of reference. We don't have it. I mean, maybe we should. I'm sure it's a lovely place to vacation and it would be great to visit, but we just do not have that connection. And it is funny because sometimes there's a connection to a country and it's a big deal. And, you know, Jeremy Lin, for instance, who was American, but the connection to China for a period of time elevated his celebrity and elevated his stardom to a degree. So I think that's a big aspect. I laugh a little bit because the NBA had these grand visions, this grand neoliberal projects to we're going to beat football because we're going to be international and we're going to get a superstar from China and a superstar from India. And oh my, we're just going to rack up the dollars around the globe. And in one of these, almost like when a genie grants you the Faustian bargain, is that how it works? Does a genie do that? Well, somebody does it. The monkey's paw, whatever we want to call it. It's, yes, you will be the most international of sports. And your big stars from around the world will be from tiny Eastern European countries. Here you go. There you go. So they kind of deserve it for their greed. But again, these guys earned it, right? I mean, it's no knock on Jokic. It's no knock on Luka. It's no knock on Giannis. These guys outcompeted the Americans in many instances. And then I look at it as, yes, that's part of the why, but then it's the NBA's responsibility to get these guys to transcend, to find a way to tell a story. I emphasize it sounds maybe hippy dippy, but everything is story. We understand everything through story. And if the NBA isn't telling the story of why you should pay attention to somebody, they didn't have to when it came to Steph, it was sort of obvious and it just happened. But if they're not telling you the story of why you should pay attention to somebody, a lot of people are not going to be able to figure out why. And so I'm not sure what that story should be with the aforementioned players. I think they screwed it up with Giannis, frankly.
Definitely.
But they've got to figure out a way, and it's just not good enough to sit there and hope that these fantastic players of theirs become insanely popular.
going back, just kind of talking about the European thing, like Dirk is another close comparison, but Germany is a country all Americans know. Like Americans know about 7 countries. Germany's one of them.
Yes.
So Serbia is not one of those ones. So that's another contrast. But to your point, this is where it really gets interesting to me. It is about the way the league markets itself. And the most important people in terms of marketing it are the big name brands, of course. We're talking Nike and Gatorade and all those big ones. Now, increasingly so, the agencies that have a big stranglehold on how the league markets itself. But the third part I would put in here, and maybe it's the biggest one in my opinion, is the league's main media partners. And when Shaq had Jokic on during his MVP season and spoke Russian to him, that was the league. Even though it went viral, by the way, like everybody picked this up as like, look how funny this is. Oh my gosh. And it's like, no, this is example A of a failure to tell a very compelling story and the most simplest entry point to that story. And we're laughing about how bad we are at doing this.
Yeah. They should have sent them to wherever Jokic has those horses. I want that to be part of the touchstone that the American public has to him. And I think he doesn't make it easy. He is very reserved. He feels unknowable in a way. So that's part of it. But they've got to figure out this is someone you should pay attention to. It's that simple. It's like, here is why. I need one sentence on why I need to pay attention to this guy. And they're not really doing that. I don't know if it's that they don't know how. And I think a lot of it too, as you were saying, is they kind of delegate it. They delegate it to the major sneaker brands, especially. And the major sneaker brands have an interest in a certain kind of player. And they're not really going to help you when it comes to the big men, because big men typically don't sell sneakers. So it's almost on the NBA to fill that void and make these big guys as popular, maybe not as popular, but approaching the popularity as the aforementioned Shaquille O'Neal, who was that big guy who was just world famous. I watched the 2006 finals with the Heat and the Mavericks. I had a buddy, he had a friend, she was from Siberia, and she, I guess, was in the international school at my college. She sits down with us. She doesn't know anything about sports. She knows barely anything about the United States. And she knew who Shaq was. She actually asked, "Why is Shaq so big?" Which was an interesting question. It did have a great answer to it. But that's what they have to do somehow. And I'm sympathetic to a degree. There are things I criticize about them. I don't think that this is one of the easier things, but it just seems like they also haven't been doing it. And it's difficult to hit a target if you don't aim for it.
I think there's a couple things at play with this, with regards to the media. I mean, we're about the same age. We grew up with NBA inside stuff, and some of it, there was just less media to be consumed. So it was easier to say, like, okay, we're going to do things this way, because if it's good or bad, doesn't matter. People are going to tune in on Saturday. It's the only NBA show to watch. But what they did is Ahmad Rashad would go to, oh, we're going bass fishing with big country Brian Reeves, and next week we're gonna go and we're gonna ride horses with her. Whatever. You just went in and we're like, this is a guy. This is what they like to do. Here's what practice is like, and it's just, this is why it's interesting. And I think that when you have this sort of big picture, we're growing the league and we're telling these stories without competition, there's something there. Competition with the media, with social media now, it's instantaneous. And I always laugh when people say, we play the Lakers so much because they do ratings. They do ratings. I always think, yes, but ratings are in decline. Yeah, but they go up just a little bit in their downward spiral every time we play that Lakers note. They kind of take a little bump. And I sit here and I think, you're looking at short-term trends for solutions to a long.
It's a withdrawal. It's not an investment.
Exactly. That's exactly what's happening. So for me, this I'm oversimplifying things here, because I mean, you're going to hear I'm a little salty about it, but it's like we've gone from the Ahmad Rashad storytelling to now the Nick Wright arguing about whether or not Jokic is the 5th or 6th best player. And it's like, what does it matter? Why is this the way we're framing the stories that we're telling?
Well, or we're just not even telling stories at all. I'm maybe a 1990s nostalgist at heart, but I think, again, storytelling is powerful, and those Marv Albert, Bob Costas intros to big games, NBA and NBC, why don't they do that? It would take what, like 2 minutes to set the stage? I always use the example. I mentioned the just incredibly exciting 2016 NBA Finals. It was so bizarre to me when I was invited on, I think it was the Chase Down podcast. They did this really cool thing where they watched every one of those finals games and they would have a guest to relive one of them. I had never watched any of those games on television because I was there
Oh
covering
yeah.
it. I mean, I would see the synergy, whatever,
Right.
whatever, but I watched the broadcast, and I was completely just dumbstruck by how this epic event that I'd experienced in real life was drained of a lot of what made it feel interesting and exciting as a TV product. It was
Mm,
almost like they were trying to make it worse. They didn't have an intro building up to these epic clashes between the Warriors and Cavs. Instead, they had the Roots, and hey, I like the Roots. The Roots are cool to concert, but they were kind of phoning it in, and they
yeah.
were doing these weird songs. I remember they were using this motif as the number two, and they were going two games, da, 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 da,
Yeah.
da. Like Kyrie is the number two, and it's just what purpose does like whose idea in a meeting is this? What purpose does it serve? And then you watch the broadcast, and Jeff Van Gundy totally distracted all over the place. They pan to a dying Craig Sager. And I mean, I don't have any objection to that, but Mark Jackson starts rambling about, I don't want people to tell me good things about myself after I'm dead. I want them to tell me it while I'm alive. And these are things that are happening in a close game 6 elimination game,
What are we
sometimes in the
doing?
fourth quarter. And it's just, holy shit, nobody that's part of this operation has any interest in it being successful. And
Yeah.
so I think a major problem, and you mentioned Nick Wright, but he's not working for the broadcast partner,
Right. Right.
and he's doing
Correct.
his thing. But it's the broadcast partner. The problem is ESPN. ESPN cheapens everything it touches
Yeah.
almost. It makes things seem worse. And perhaps this was a penny wise, pound foolish move by the NBA when they shocked everybody in the early 2000s, leaving NBC for ESPN ABC, because while that was a very alluring option to get on the big cable channel like they did, it seems like those people over there don't know how to do sports television. They don't know how to build up a sense of gravitas and grandeur. And I think they've undermined the product even in times when it was at a post Jordan peak, such as 2016.
And you get all the stuff you're talking about. The NBA, they are selling cool as much as anything. And when you're trying to be cool, this is why when you have the Roots and we're doing the number and we're doing this, it's like, hold on. We don't need to be cool right now. The game is so
No.
cool. Like this, the stakes are so high. It's inherently cool what we are doing and what's going on and all the drama there. But we don't need to make it cooler where it's actually already there. And I think this is what's Steph. I mentioned earlier, Steph being the face or the Warriors being the face, not on purpose. I think the NBA wanted LeBron and still does, plays as if LeBron was the protagonist, even though I think fans engage as if Steph Curry is the protagonist of it. There's obviously both people, but
Yeah.
some of this has to do. I always think back to LeBron returning to Cleveland. If you remember when they play in the piano, I'm coming home, and he steps up and he's like, I'm not gonna do what people say. And it felt so weird. Like
Yeah,
we were trying
so
so hard.
contrived. Yeah, yeah, yeah. The Family Guy, when Peter says he doesn't like The Godfather because it insists upon itself, which is a joke, and he's being absurd in that scene. But yes, that is a thing that happens, that you are insisting upon yourself and you are telegraphing every move, and it doesn't feel real. And I think part of the problem, honestly, is that athletes are not great at doing the storytelling.
Yep.
And not just athletes. I think anybody struggles with that. We don't have enough separation. We often don't know what's interesting about ourselves,
So true.
or we want to hide interesting aspects because we want to portray ourselves as something else. And you've seen that with the Players Tribune, where there are some good articles, but for the
Sure.
most part, that wasn't really a hit. It's not something that people think is a necessity in their lives as sports fans. So, yeah, I think again, you've got to take the reins. You've got to do the storytelling, because if you're going to leave it to LeBron, as Nike does, because he has so much influence within that company, he's going to do a really bad job of it, which is what he's done. He makes terrible ads for the most part. And I think if anything, he is just less popular despite maintaining an impossible standard of excellence.
And the funniest article I think that you've done at House of Strauss certainly hinges around the LeBron Ruffles commercials.
Oh yeah.
And some of those, like I mean, I laughed so hard when I first got through the SNL sketch, and you contrast it to the Ruffle one, you think, oh my God, they're the same thing. So if you subscribe to House of Strauss, read that article first. It was too funny. this is another part of it, is athletes trying to tell their own stories. We have all these different people that are just like inflicting their own perspective on this, none of which is all that compelling. And you can correct. I'm so curious if you agree or disagree with this. I feel like Steph Curry, while he certainly tries to tell his own story, almost seems, I mean, it's certainly in comparison to LeBron, but I think in comparison to most NBA athletes, seems content to let the story be like, I remember when his shoes came out, everybody roasted I don't remember, Steph Curry threes or whatever. And he kind of like got in on the joke a little bit. It's just kind of, yeah, this is all right. We're making fun of myself today. And I just wonder if that's also part of the appeal, is it just feels more authentic with him in comparison to these other ones.
Yeah, and he certainly tries to brand himself, but this gets at, again, it's these ineffable qualities, and why it's fun to talk about this stuff if you are of a certain mind of why is this resonant, why is that resonant. People can smell security. They
Yeah.
can. They can smell it on you. They know when you badly need them and need their love and approval. And these bastards, all of us in the public, we withhold it when that happens. We don't give it to you when it seems like you want it. But if you don't seem like you need it, like I would say, pre-injury Klay Thompson might have been the epitome of this.
Yeah.
Oh, everybody just loves Klay. This guy doesn't care at all. He barely wants us around. Oh, we love you, Klay. We love you. And I think LeBron in a lot of the cloying social media posts, just the contrived nature of the way he's often trying to get attention, he would have been much better off if we just knew less about him. And in some ways, it
Yep.
feels like we don't know a tremendous amount about Steph, and it seems like Steph isn't interested in us knowing more about him, and that seems to help him in a way. It's just this kind of magnetism of security versus insecurity.
Kevin Durant's a really interesting one in this way to me. And you're obviously have been a lot closer to the situation, but KD was, in my opinion, among the more insecure athletes that we've had over the last bit. But there was maybe being outed with the burners and just some of how much, not, I don't want to say vitriol, but just how
he was like the most authentically insecure.
Yeah, for sure. But he just lost last year in a game 7 overtime in a playoff series. And I don't feel like anybody rightfully holds that against him in the way that we might have before it. Because it was like, that was an awesome series. That was an awesome game. He didn't win, but so what? It was like, and there's almost something freeing about that. And I wonder if he has sort of turned a corner personally in that regard.
He might have. I think sometimes it helps to go through certain forms of adversity. I'm not around him. God knows he doesn't like when I psychoanalyze him.
Sure.
But it does seem like he has settled down in that respect to a degree. It's so interesting because it almost seems like Steph's sense of security was part of what allowed him to be great, that he had such confidence, that he could be such a giver, and such a teammate in the way that he was. And Kevin Durant's insecurity, I do think, helped fuel the greatness. I mean, we tell that story about Michael Jordan, that he's got something wrong with him that allows him to be a competitive maniac, that he's cheating at cards against your grandma. Well, I think for KD, there was a void in him, and he wanted to show how great he was, and he wanted to get that adulation, and it meant a lot to him. And he probably would have been great regardless, just because he's so talented. But I do think that was part of the story, and it's one of the reasons why I felt like it's good to tell that story. People are fascinated by success. They want to know why it happens. So when I'm writing about KD and I'm talking about some stuff he doesn't want me talking about, I certainly get it from his perspective. I get it. I wouldn't like somebody writing about my flaws, but those flaws are part of that story that people want to know about, which is, how does this guy rise from just this desperate situation he grew up in to become one of the greatest basketball players ever? I think that the insecurity was part of that.
And to me, it's one of the more fascinating stories. I think Giannis is another great example of this. What did he have to do to win a championship? He had to make free throws. The thing that he hasn't been good at. He went 19 of 19 or something in the decisive game en route to helping the team win. And I think watching Giannis last year, you saw this freeing of, what is it people say about me? What is it? It was almost like, this is a challenge between myself and myself. Like, can I be the best of myself? And whether you win or lose, it'll lead you to greatness when you sort of focus on those things. And I feel, at least again, I'm playing pipe psychologist here. I know we always get in trouble here, but it's a story I like to tell myself about KD that I feel like he is maybe arriving closer to that point after thinking, if I get the championships, that's going to do it. If I do this, like then people are going to see it and they're going to anoint me. And it's like, hey, I don't need that. I'm going to anoint myself through, just pushing myself to be the best. Do you remember the old commercial? It's actually a great one. It's funny that it was Carmelo Anthony, but it was John Thompson reading off championships don't equal greatness, scoring titles don't equal greatness, all these things. Only greatness equals greatness. And it was, and I just loved it because it's like, yes, this is actually sports. We do, the championship piece hangs over everything because it needs to. We have to have it, but it's always a battle of an individual against themselves and a team against themselves.
Yes, and that's what was so beautiful about Giannis just repeatedly going to the free throw line. If I miss, I miss. But I'm not changing my route of attack. I'm not going to shy away. I'm not going to give in to fear as some players do. That's inspirational. We can't be 7 feet tall and able to Euro step from the half court line and dunk, but that's something everybody can relate to. Looking at just something that is uncomfortable, something that tests your mettle, and taking a deep breath and doing it anyway. On the small, pathetic scale, right? Last week, Nate Duncan said he could teach me how to ski passably from never having skied in my life. I find it terrifying. I realize driving with Nate that he's got a need for speed, and maybe I don't have that within me, right? I'm not going to love it. I'm not going to love it out there.
By the way, about Nate Duncan, he's a fast driver, huh?
Yeah, he's an efficient driver is how I think you would put it.
Okay.
But I go out there with him. I fall on my ass a bunch of times. There are certain moments where he tells me to do something and I'm looking down at a slope and I'm scared shitless, but I take a deep breath and I do it anyway. And God, it's just a wonderful feeling. It's a wonderful feeling to be scared, to get out of your comfort zone and to just go through it almost regardless of whatever the result is. And so I think that inspirational aspect of sports, of facing adversity, is something that people can relate to. And it almost seems like we're trying to protect the players from that element a lot of the time, and have there be no adversity and no criticism other than the silly criticisms that you'll see on these debate shows. And so, yeah, I mean, I went off on a whole tangent there, but I think that that is something that is very much resonant. It's part of the Michael Jordan story of getting his ass kicked by the Pistons. And that is a story, as much as we can tell it, that we should be telling if we're interested in selling basketball as a sport.
I think Jokic is on par with Giannis, with Steph, with all of these guys. It is sort of innate in just who he is. I mean, I don't know, maybe it's something he's learned or how he was raised or people around him or what have you. I honestly don't think Jokic cares about the outside perspective. And I know that every athlete says this. I think Jokic is uniquely insulated. Does he care? Of course. Like if somebody shows him this or this, but I think he's so content to be like, hey, so-and-so said he's the MVP, not you. He's like, oh, he might be, man. Yeah, he's a good player. Somebody said you got swept by the Suns. Like, yeah, man, they kicked our ass. We were not quite. It's just like, to him, he's like, you guys can talk about this stuff. For me, I'm content with exactly who and what I am and how hard I work to be that.
Can we get into that? Because maybe that's one of the reasons why he's not connecting, is that he's a genius at this game, but it doesn't seem like he needs it necessarily. I don't know how to think about it. I don't know if we've ever seen anybody like this. It's almost like, as far as offensive impact, I know he plays very much unlike Shaquille O'Neal, but he's almost similar in just offensive dominance every night, with maybe some defensive issues, but offensive dominance every night. And it just seems like you don't know what's going on inside his head. It almost feels like, I'm not trying to offend the fans of the Nuggets here, it almost feels like he's one of those 7-footers who didn't choose basketball and didn't love it, except he's incredible and he might be the best player in the league.
He's Goodwill Hunting. I mean, in a lot of ways.
Yeah, he's a genius.
That scene where he's like, you think this is hard for me? Like, this is the easiest thing. I don't know why you can't do it. And I think he's sort of like that. I think he loves basketball. He works incredibly hard. It's a sneaky thing about him that he is probably the hardest worker on the Denver roster. and it doesn't get publicized. He doesn't push and promote those things, but he has a drive in him. But I think you're right that, and he said this himself, it's not my favorite hobby. It's up there, but it's not my absolute favorite. Horses are his favorite, and I actually think he retires in about 5 or 6 years.
Wow.
I don't think he does once he is no longer the best player, I don't think he hangs on for those additional 5, 6 years as the sidekick and then ultimately the veteran. I just think he's like, hey man, this was a really good run. I'm going to go raise my kids with my horses and have a good time. And who could be upset about that? But he does. I do think though that he is just sort of content with, and some of this is cultural. You've traveled abroad. Have you traveled abroad before? I mean,
Yeah, I mean, not extensively, but yeah.
but you just know when you come back sometimes from going to like Italy or something, or just how much advertising there is in the US. And you're kind of like, oh man, I didn't realize I'm constantly bombarded with this type of selling. And I think Jokic feels very much the same way of like, you guys don't realize you're always selling something out here. And you want me to like speak to something you're trying to sell. Like, I don't know, man, you guys do that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's a different culture in Euro ball, right?
Yeah.
It's less individual. All the cliches are true. I think, wasn't it Luca who was talking about why it's so much harder to drop 30 points, 40 points in Euro League versus in the NBA. And so I think that's part of it, that there's a bit of a cultural disconnect. And I always liked thinking about it. I always loved when the Oklahoma City Thunder teams, that incredibly talented OKC team of KD, Harden, and Westbrook would go up against that Spurs team, because it did feel like American individualism up against Euro socialism, right? And it was both styles were captivating. Both styles were great. It was incredible theater to watch how Harden and Durant and Westbrook went up against the Spurs, and how the Spurs were very much more like a European team, where sharing is caring, a lot of passing. And so it is a cultural difference. It is a stylistic difference. And I do think perhaps that informs why the public hasn't been able to catch on to this whole Jokic thing.
What I think is funny, this could be true of politics as well, but just keeping it to basketball. What's funny is this is kind of a false dichotomy. It's rarely one or the other.
No.
It's what can you learn from both things that sort of create a confluence of the perfect basketball, the perfect player, or what have you. And that's what's so funny to me, is there is these like a lot of things. You know who bridged this gap? And I actually think it's a sneaky. I think this conversation would be framed so different in the last 2 years of the NBA with regards to Giannis, Luka, Jokic. It would be so different. Kobe Bryant bridged that gap. Because he was an American player who had this soft spot in his heart for just foreign players, obviously from his upbringing and from other things. But it's not lost on me that he made 2 MVP predictions, Giannis and Jokic. He's so far undefeated since making those predictions. And I just think if he were around these last 2 years with the rise of Giannis, the rise of Jokic, I just think he could almost single-handedly change the conversation of like, no, you guys are missing the point. This is the point.
Yeah. That's I had never thought about that, but in a way he could be an ambassador to those guys, especially since he was supposed to be on I believe it was the Turner set, and it would have been great to see Kobe on television. And I think he's somebody that could have connected with the public and told that story. So that's just one of the many unfortunate aspects to the great tragedy that happened. But I think that you're right, that they almost need an ambassador or an emissary to explain some of these guys. Less so with Giannis. Giannis feels knowable. You know what I mean? That just feels like a botched job. That just feels like Nike didn't know what they were doing.
It could be. We got to get to this Comcast altitude thing. How familiar are you with the dispute here?
No. So I want it explained, because I look at the local ratings and I look at the national ratings, and I was aware that there was a dispute that was preventing a ton of people in Denver from watching the Nuggets. And so I would kind of factor that into the analysis. But I don't know the nature of the dispute, and it's bizarre to me that it's gone on as long as it has. So if you could tell me, I'm
sure. The quick overhead of this is that Comcast is the largest cable provider in Denver by quite a bit. I think they make up over 2/3 of the Denver metro area for their cable service. They're also the best cable provider just in terms of ease of use and what have you. They stopped carrying Altitude, the regional sports network owned by the Kroenke family. It's a unique RSN because usually these are like NBC. They're part of this conglomerate. Altitude is a one-off. They cover just Denver sports teams. So they're a little bit more vulnerable sort of to Comcast saying, hey, it's not worth what you guys have traditionally thought. We're just not that interested. If we lost you, it would hurt you guys significantly more than it would hurt us. We have all the leverage here. And they were right. Comcast or KSE, Cronky Sports, and Altitude dug their heels in and said, well, if you're not going to do this, we're not going to budge. And so we are now approaching the third straight year where anybody in Denver that has Comcast, it's blacked out. You can't watch the games at all. And of course, that is an enormous barrier of entry. Are there other, can you go to DirecTV or one of the Evoca TV, as we now have as a sponsor of the show? You know, can you go to those? Yes, but inevitably there's going to be this barrier of entry. So this is the big picture of it, but we're starting to see these carriage disputes pop up around the country now, and that cable, like everything else, they're just looking at the big picture and they're saying, hey, these things are becoming less valuable as there's more media outlets. So we actually need to cut and sort of specialize in the things that are bringing us the most value. And I just wonder, is this sort of the future, that the old way of distributing these games through local RSNs is not just dying, but probably already dead, and we're just waiting for everybody to realize?
Well, to give you another newsletter recommendation, since you have blessedly signed up for one, Stratechery by Ben Thompson, where he covers the tech scene and business in depth. He has gone in great detail on the RSN situation. And yes, it does seem like the RSNs are dying, and that the NBA, I think the Thompson, I'm just going to butcher whatever his prediction is, but he thinks that, yeah, they'll be fine when it comes to national deals. They'll get another big deal because it's so valuable to ESPN and Disney to continue to have the NBA product. But where they're going to get it in the neck is going to be on the local level. It's going to be the shrinking of RSNs. I know they cut some recent deal to sort of stem the bleeding there. I don't have a good explanation of what's going to happen. It does feel like the RSNs, they do seem like they're of a bygone era already. It does feel like watching public access, but it seems like somebody should have stepped in the situation. You just explained an aspect of it that I hadn't really thought about, because do you wonder if maybe ego is part of this, because it's the Cronky kind of mom and pop shop, and it would have been a situation where cooler heads would have prevailed if it wasn't wrapped into being the family product. And so you wish somebody was able to intervene, because you can't have this. Denver was already operating from a bit of a disadvantage since it's such a Broncos town, as you well know, and to have the basketball team as it's rising and exciting, not seen by so many people locally, you just can't have it, and you can't have it go on for this long. I wish I was smarter about how to solve it, but it's revealing of something. It's revealing of some sort of inefficiency or something malfunctioning to have this happen.
Well, full disclosure, I mean, I think about this stuff a lot, and I know you do as well. But obviously, now I'm a partner here at DNVR. We now have PHNX in Phoenix and CHGO in Chicago, and our plans now, the word's out. We're trying to go to every city. We try to replace a little bit of RSNs, and not because we hate RSNs, just because there's an opportunity. The internet has freed the pregame and postgame. We now do pregame shows. We do postgame shows. And to your point, is it a bit antiquated to say, hey, let's go to the guy in the suit for 30 minutes? So it's a team-sponsored company to go for 30 minutes to hear what they say. Maybe people just want to sit on a couch with their buddies and do this. And
not me. I want the mellifluous sounds of Bob Fitzgerald saying, yes, sir, and complaining that a guy on the other team is making wide open 3-point shots as though it's an act of catastrophe and an act of God. But anyway, you were saying, I'm sorry. I had to proclaim my love for Bob Fitzgerald to the world.
I just think the media landscape is evolving so quickly. Very few people see around the corner of it. And I'm trying myself to look at my own habits and obviously to see the habits of our audience. And I think, this stuff just doesn't have a prayer. Like, there's too many other ways to entertain yourself in the way that an RSN typically would, that I just don't see how they can compete. We extrapolate this 5 years, 10 years, 2 years, I don't know. Eventually, this is coming for everybody. And so I just wonder if the NBA, I think the NBA has an obligation to look at this and say, this is a problem. It's strangling certain fan bases in little pockets around the country. And is this horrible for our business? And it comes back to what you said earlier about the 20,000 fans in the arena and the feeling you get when Phil Collins comes on the PA. The Nuggets just hosted the Boston Celtics. That was a Celtics home game at Ball Arena.
Hmm.
They mocked Nikola Jokic every time he missed a shot, chanting MVP in his own home arena, just as sort
Wow.
of this like F you. And it's been this way for 10 years, but it just feels like every year it goes a little further, just a little bit further. Now, a couple things. Denver is an incredible city. Everybody's moving here. It just won't stop. House prices have quadrupled in the last 10 years. It's just
No.
everybody's moving here, and we are an incredibly friendly people. We're very accommodating to when people come here. So part of it is just like forces beyond everybody's control. But part of me thinks people move. It's so easy to move cities now. And it's so easy to move cities and hold on to your old city in some virtual way. Like, hey, I'm a Celtics
Hmm.
fan, but I moved to Denver, still watch the Celtics, still go to the Celtics bar, still get to go to the arena and be with Celtics fans. And I just wonder, are we losing this in little cities that we don't realize? Denver's not a small city, it's a
Hmm.
big city. Are we starting to lose this and we don't realize that that thing that brought all races, cultures, age, religions together under one banner, is that now gone? And is this an
Yeah.
important thing that we're losing?
We're less provincial. It seems like we had thicker accents back in the day than today because if you're a person of a certain education
Right.
level, you just kind of you have a I don't think my accent is all that differentiated from your accent. I mean, I
Sure.
can dip into my San Diegan if I really want to, but I don't think it's all that differentiated. And so it just seems like there's less of a sense of community in these cities. Certain cities, it's really in there. And I think Pittsburgh seems I love what Pittsburgh does, by the way, as a random aside, where all the teams have the same
Yeah.
color
Same.
scheme.
Yep.
I think that's a
The
that's a great
banner.
way to do it. Yeah. And I think ultimately you might take the edge off that sense, that provincial sense in a city with all the movement, but it's never going to go away. And I think the NBA erred in trying to swivel around that and fast forward too much to the future and say, people are just going to follow players. They're just going to follow
Right. Right.
individuals. They don't need the guys to play for any particular team. They're going to be just as excited about Kawhi Leonard as a Spur as when he's on the Clippers. That's not how it works. That's not how
Right.
people relate to basketball. They are into teams, and a lot of the reason why they're into teams is that the team is in the city that they're in. Now, I think you could maybe make the teams a little bit more transcenders of barriers just by promoting certain teams, promoting certain brands, just like how I, as somebody who doesn't watch soccer, I know about Barcelona, I know about
Right.
Real
Right.
Madrid, right? So you could do a little more of that. I just don't think we're never going to totally get rid of the city as kind of the fulcrum of team affiliation for fans. And frankly, I wouldn't want us to. I think that's how it should be. I like that there
Of
are different
course.
cities with different cultures.
Of course, but that's the part I just worry about. Like, and I'm seeing it here in many ways. It feels like ground zero because Denver is not the small market. It's big enough that there are so many people coming here from other places, but small enough that like ESPN's
Yeah.
not going to dedicate a show to them or a page on their
Hmm.
website to the Denver Index, the Nuggets Index, or anything like that. So it's
What would
kind of
it what would it even be called? The hops index? Like, what are you
man.
going with?
We'll have to think of something clever here, but
Yeah.
it wouldn't get much traction. I know that it would not be a banger.
Yeah.
But I just worry. To me, it's actually something pretty important when we talk about how fragmented cities are becoming. And I mean, even the city of Denver over the last 5 years, but especially 10 years, has changed a lot in ways both interesting and exciting, but also in ways that are pretty concerning. And I sit here and I
Hmm.
think, is the city losing a little bit of that, of its collectiveness, its soul to
Yeah.
it? And what role do sports, even if it's very, very small, what role does that play? And what are all the forces that are sort of profiting off it doesn't matter if they're wearing green or
Hmm.
Lakers yellow and purple. It doesn't matter what they're wearing. As long as they're in the seats, it's a success. And I'm looking at that and I'm going, I'm not so sure.
Yeah, no, I think it does. Somebody in the chat, Joseph says, come to Philly. I did a podcast with Spike Eskin, and he said, and I hadn't thought about it, that Philly is this unusual large city because almost everybody in Philly is from Philly, right? It's not
Right.
a place transplants flock to.
Right.
People ignore it on their way to DC from New York, and on their
Right.
way from New York to DC, they skip right past. So that has allowed Philly to have this really intense caustic sports culture. And that's really cool. I don't, the one I don't understand, I don't understand how Boston has maintained that sense of provincialism because they have to be getting people coming there from all over the country with all their colleges and everything else. And yet they've maintained that very dedicated sports culture. these are big questions, man. I mean, these questions are bigger than basketball. How to rebuild a sense of community, how to make people feel connected to one another on the basis of proximity. What a quaint concept. What was once the building block of civilization is this now antiquated thing because we think we're just going to plug our brains into the metaverse. I'm not sure. I'm sure Ticketmaster gets some sort of extra cut from the transplants needing to show up for their favorite team but I don't know. I can't answer these things, but these are great questions.
This is the Bill Simmons, I think, with Boston. It's the one, they're just meaner there. I mean this sincerely. Like, it is a place where people are a little grouchy. Like, you got to be on your toes. You got to be ready for a fight.
A lot of sarcasm. Yeah.
So somebody comes in and says, "Hey, man, you mind if I turn the TV to the Lakers game?" They're say, "Fuck you, get out of here." Whereas in Denver, I think it's more of a like, "Oh, you want to throw a Lakers party at my bar? Of course, bring your friends. Like, we're gonna set you up." And then also just the cold weather thing. Like, this is cold weather. Everybody's a little bit more edge. Colorado's 300 days of sunshine. It's like California light. Everybody's just happy and accommodating here, and I think it's part of it. But lots of forces at play. Ethan, we got to wrap up our hour. This was great. Honestly, we could do a whole nother hour. There were so many things I have left on the note board here. So maybe at some other point we can reconvene. But I really appreciate it. This was a great discussion.
I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I don't know what you do to get the commenters you get. Everybody is just in this scroll saying reasonable, happy things. Is this the internet? Have I died and gone to heaven?
It's a couple things. Mostly though, it's Colorado, man. We're happy, we're chill. I think Colorado is chill. We're all medicated, and we got an IPA, and we're just like, hey, I disagree politely with you.
Well, I thoroughly enjoyed it. Would love to come back anytime, and good luck. I'd love to see a Denver championship. I'm pandering. I'll stop pandering to your audience.
Well, when you're in town, you could really pander. When you're in town, you have to come visit our bar, the DNVR bar. It is the heart of the city of Denver, in my opinion. So, thanks so much, everybody. Check out House of Strauss, the podcast House of Strauss, the Substack, and everything else, and the Victory Machine as well. I'll plug that as well because I love the book. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.